Alrighty, well, hey, thanks so much, everyone, tuning in. I am super excited to chat with some of these fine folks. Hey, I've got Corey Ball over here, author of Hacking APIs, putting out by No Starch Press, I believe. And hey, I'm totally going to ask you to fill in the gaps here because I can sing your praises just as well, but I know you can do the right justice here. And Dan, I think, hey, helping out the crew, building out the team for all the incredible stuff that's moving and shaking at APISEC University. But please, gentlemen, introduce yourself and hey, give me a little bit of context just as well. What are you up to these days and what's awesome in your world?
Sure. So quick intro of myself, Corey Ball. I am senior manager over penetration testing at Moss Adams. There, I'm a pen test consultant. So day job is helping our clients through pen testing their network and web apps and APIs. And when I'm not doing that, I'm doing cool things like working with Dan over at APISEC University to help create our courses and get more information out, and writing books like Hacking APIs with No Starch Press. Yeah.
Hey, John, and I'm Dan Barahona. My day job used to be with APISEC, which is a company that does automated API security testing. Still my day job, but last year kind of collaborated with Corey and came up with this idea of building a course to complement the Hacking APIs book. And that was sort of the genesis of APISEC University. And what started out as, kind of an interesting thing to contribute and build for the community has now really become my full-time day job, whatever you want to call it, Dean of APISEC University or Provost. I don't even know what that means, but APISEC University has become really just a tremendous destination and a site for educational content around APIs and how to secure them with our flagship course from Corey, but lots of grand plans to grow and expand that and add a lot more good stuff going forward.
Well, hey, it's incredible. And kudos to you both for all that fantastic work and the fact that you're keeping with it. Like, it's still moving and shaking. And I want to get it, hey, right out in the open right away, because I think some folks are going to be jumping at the bit. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but the course is free. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So the first course we put out is the API pen test course, and it's completely free. All the tools and everything involved are free as well. And then you can go through the course and complete all the exercises and exams and walk away with a certificate of completion.
Yeah, and I just to add on to that, totally free. You can sign up. It's apisecuniversity.com or apisecu.com, whatever you like. Sign up, take the course. There's about, I don't know, Corey, 12 hours worth of video content in there with all the text details. So you can see the screen grabs. You can see Corey actually using the tools and hacking APIs live in the course. There are quizzes and assessments throughout. And if you get through all of that, you get your own badge and certificate. And we see them by the hundreds getting posted onto LinkedIn. It's a really gratifying thing. And I'll just say, we launched this thing back in August, and we just crossed 30,000 students in the course. So really excited about that, and it's definitely got us thinking about where we can go, where we can take this forward.
Man, that is so awesome. I've seen them, shouting and celebrating over on LinkedIn just as well. And I think, and again, another incredible kudos and applause for you both. Hats off for making this thing free and accessible and spreading education and spreading knowledge and just getting the info out there for everyone, because I'm a huge proponent. I try to be as much as an advocate for that as I can. And I think, look, that's the way that we can really move the needle. That's how we can bring value to the whole industry, the whole community. And man, you guys are doing it right. So kudos to you. If I may, I know, hey, we've been slinging around this whole acronym just to kind of add a little bit more color. If folks don't happen to know, could I catch your definition and how you kind of at least explain or rappel what is an API?
Yeah, which I get that question quite a bit, especially from non-technical friends and such. And the definition, application programming interface, just saying that really doesn't help anyone. And so APIs are a common interface for web applications to work together. So I'm specifically hacking APIs is all about REST APIs. There's some in there about GraphQL hacking as well. But yeah, the book is all about hacking web APIs, and same with the course. So I like to bring up Uber as a great example. So about 15 plus years ago, when developers were creating a new application, they would have to specialize or have developers specialize in all the different aspects of development. And so you'd have to have part of the team that could develop maps and work with GPS and process payments and all these other things. Web APIs came along and helped developers use the specialization of other organizations. And that API allows them to pull the data and functionality out of these other groups. And so now you have a company like Uber that can pull the API from Google Maps, and they can pull payment processing from another group and put it all together to create this new application that didn't exist before, new business, new organization. So APIs really help the data flow and shared functionality between organizations and different applications. And if data is one of the world's most desired resources, most valuable resources, APIs are what allow that to flow.
That was going to be our next question. And I think, hey, you were leading into it really well. It's like, why is testing the API and why is, hey, checking and validating and assessing API security? Why is that so important? Why is that so vital? Why is it just really a necessity here?
Yeah, so my background, I started out in penetration testing, specifically network pen testing, and then moved into web app pen testing. And from that perspective of an adversary, you're trying to break into an organization through the external attack surface, get past the firewall, get into the network, land on a machine, pivot to the right machine, find the data, and then exfiltrate. Now, you can really bypass all of that with a vulnerable API. So a public vulnerable API is going to have a direct link to the most valuable resources that a company is trying to protect their data. And if that's vulnerable, then I can simply use the API, request those resources, and steal it without having to go through all the trouble of everything involved in a good network pen test.
No, I was just thinking, because when I try to capture it, I always think like, man, that is just the whole brains of the operation. It's the central core, the nucleus of a software, like of an application. Hey, if you can get right to the core of it, more power to you.
Yeah, and there's really a few parts to it. Like they are often vulnerable and unprotected, and I think part of that is there is such a business driver behind them that security is still trying to catch up as usual. And with those left vulnerable and overlooked, it leaves a lot of deal-breaking vulnerabilities in place.
Yeah, I would just jump in and add, like these APIs are exposing like valuable, useful functionality, like being able to process a credit card or look up a map or, book an Uber. But those APIs expose any flaws in vulnerabilities and, logic issues that might exist on the back end too. And we see this, every week, almost daily, examples of APIs getting breached. Where someone has discovered, the interesting about an API is you can craft any request that you want, right, and just put it into the request, and either the backend is smart enough to reject it and detect that it's malicious, or it's not. But you can't do the equivalent in, say, a web application, right? Like if you take what happened to Coinbase, right? Somebody basically used the API, they reverse engineered it, and was able to change the source account, the source of funds from my account to your account, right? But then deposit the proceeds back into my account. Impossible to achieve that through the web app. There's no button to adjust the source account, right, to somebody else. But this person discovered that, you could literally add a variable to the API request that says source account equals John, right? Destination account equals Dan, and process. And in that case, it actually worked, right? And so these APIs don't just expose the legitimate functionality, but there can be those logic gaps and flaws that also get exposed.
It's so crazy. It's so wild. Again, I think just, man, the mothership of the inherent functionality of an application, and that's sitting right there. And knowing how to speak that language, just, hey, as you mentioned, whether it's GraphQL, whether it's whatever, that's a lot of power. So very, very cool. May I ask, hey, what kind of spurred the inspiration and creativity? Like, let's write the book on this. I feel like I talk to a lot of folks now that I'm like, I genuinely get to say, oh yeah, he wrote the book on that. And like, oh, this is the expert that literally wrote the book. That's very wild to be able to have that experience more and more. But Corey, I got to ask you, my friend, where'd this idea and how'd you put pen to paper here?
Yeah. So back in 2019, near the end of 2019, I started as a pen test consultant at Moss Adams, and I was helping lead network and web app pen testing. One of the partners there said, we have this growing demand for API pen tests, and we want you to be the subject matter expert on that topic. And so I was more or less voluntold to lead that area of testing. From there, I really dove into it, and I started my search on Amazon. I just went and tried to gather all the books on the topic. I typed in hacking APIs and nothing came up for the first time in my career. And so
no Stack Overflow answer for this one. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I started to do a bunch of research. I took a bunch of notes. Over the next few months, I had 150 pages of notes put together. I'd gone to a few conferences at that time, and I would seek out, whichever elite hacker was giving the best talk and talk to them afterwards. And like, what are you doing for web API testing? And they either didn't have an answer themselves, or they just had that one person that specialized on the team.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if the leading hackers that are giving these talks don't know about it, there aren't any books on the topic, it's not put together, then, maybe I'm on to something that I could share with the community through a book. And I approached No Starch Press, and they questioned me. I think there was like 3 weeks of back and forth questions about the book, and then signed on and continued writing. And it took about 2 years from there for it to be over on my shelf.
Wow. Hey, I think you still are, if I may, first to market, though. Just as you mentioned, like, man, there wasn't an answer. So we just made it. So we built it. Okay, so we'll put it together. And again, hats off, kudos to you all. I thank you. You sent me a book, by the way, and I'm super grateful for that. I've been flipping through it, and it's just great work.
Yeah, it's highly recommended reading. I'm not super technical. The first 3 chapters are really for anyone, right? If you want to understand what's an API, what are REST calls, all of the sort of basics, that's great reading, right? And the rest of the book gets into, maybe Corey, you could share some of the topic areas, and this maps very, very well over to the course as well.
That was going to be my next question. I don't know if you had anything to bring in there, Corey, but I'd love to mention, hey, this is the companion to APISEC University. Is there more love? Is there more we can chat about for what the university and course is bringing to life?
Yeah, sure. I'll touch on both of those. So the book, first 3 chapters, goes over to the basics of APIs and web apps, and really gets anyone up to speed. Anyone with like basic IT experience can get into this. And I'm really convinced that APIs can be the first thing that a new hacker hacks. And so it's a huge gap in testing right now. The classic tools that we use for web application testing often provide false negatives for API testing. So if you generically test it, especially without a token, you get back results that look like nothing is wrong with the API, so no budget is appropriated, and the testers don't see anything interesting, so they move on to the next thing. And so I think, the book and getting new testers focused on APIs, especially through the course, is a great way to help start closing that gap globally and preventing future API-related breaches.
Got to be done.
Yeah, definitely. As far as the course goes, right now we have the full course is released. You can get the certificate of completion. Next steps for that is I want to introduce like a real challenge to prove that you've developed your skills and you can apply them within a time frame. I have my OSCP. I know you have the trio on your end, which is awesome. I'm heavily inspired by the quality of tests that offensive security puts out. So I want to have something at that level. And so right now we're going through and finding developers that are going to help us develop those custom, vulnerable, API-driven apps for the course.
That's very cool. That was one thing that I did want to ask, is like, and if I may maybe jump the gun, but like, hey, what's next? What's on the horizon? What's on the roadmap? Are there more? But hey, let's get the hands-on practical application kind of capstone exam to it. Are there more things going to be sprinkled in slowly but surely?
Definitely. Yeah, this has really turned into a platform for API security related information and courses. And so I think next step is really getting that exam out there and available. And then we're going to start introducing micro courses, so much smaller, more digestible in a small time frame, courses where you can learn things like the OWASP API Security Top 10,
nice.
and other fast items, maybe compliance driven, just really the whole variety of API security topics into there. For me, within the next year, looking to hopefully develop and release a more beginners course. So this one is the API pen test course, but if someone really doesn't know about web apps and HTTP response codes and APIs, then this next course really help and match up closer to like the beginning of my book to help guide them into the topic better.
Cool. Oh, I'm stoked. I'm super excited to see what you guys are going to be cooking up next.
Yeah. Hey, John, one example there, we got contacted by probably one of the 10 largest banks, I'd say, in the US, their learning department, right? And
Nice.
And to Corey's point about kind of a lack of content, books, courses out there, they actually mandate that all their developers have to take an OWASP, web app course, but they couldn't find an equivalent for OWASP API top 10 type of things, right? So they reached out and asked if we would deliver a course to them sort of personally. And it just sort of pointed out like, there's this huge gap. They're actually mandating all their developers take Corey's API pen testing course, right? And they can't get their hands on into GitHub, for example, until they've passed the course. Like these are sort of mandatory, must know type of things. So that was, I think, a bit of an inspiration to, we need some, smaller, more digestible intro level courses. So if we sort of started with the 301, if you will, with the API pen test, that's sort of an advanced course. So now we're going to come out with the 101 and the 201s. But definitely look for quite a lot more material, a lot more content, and always we want to keep this as free and accessible as possible.
I love it. And hey, congrats. Getting it like integrated into the pipeline is a really, really cool thing. And I think that absolutely fosters growth. Some of my last questions for you, if it's all right. I know, hey, Corey, you're in the weeds on this thing. Hey, you're doing some of that pen testing for day job, cruising on a APISEC and et cetera for well, you can. But are there any, and I love to ask, are there any stories that you might be able to share? Because, hey, can we find any of those real case studies or any of those narratives and anecdotes that just absolutely prove the value and are just kind of wild and fun to tell along the campfire? Any sweet stuff that sticks out in your mind?
Sure. Yeah, I can speak generically to that.
Politically correct. Yeah, as safe as we can.
Yeah. So I've definitely had my hands on some fintech APIs where you can really drive home the difference between some of the OWASP API Security Top 10 differences. So up top at that list, you have BOLA, which is Broken Object Level Authorization. And that's really the ability of user A to access user B's resources. So I could look in with a fintech API. I could look into what's in Dan's bank account, right? So there's another one further down the list called Broken Function Level Authorization. And that one is really about being able to access functionality and interact with the resources of another user from an unauthorized testing standpoint. So again, with my account and a fintech API, it's not just the ability to look into Dan's account, but to begin transferring funds from his account back to my account. And definitely seen those out in the wild in production, and helped close those gaps during testing.
That's cool. That's super cool.
Well, I think it goes back to like, I think one of Corey's big sort of messages and sort of mantras is this whole concept of API first testing, right? And you were talking about some of these regulations. There are plenty of examples out there of organizations getting audited, getting tested, getting certified, and using the sort of traditional web app scanners and things like that, and getting a clean bill of health, right? And then there's one sort of very famous example at the Postal Service where this is a number of years ago. They had a clean bill of health from the Office of the Inspector General. They had used all of these well-known web scanning tools, nothing found. And then a few months later, what was it, 60 million user accounts accessed through a leaky API. I don't know, Corey, do you have any sort of more color to add?
Yeah, I mean, that instance is really interesting all around. That was in 2018, and the Office of the Inspector General had done a review, web app pen test, web app vulnerability assessment of the Improved Visibility program, which part of the leading features of that program was the new API that was being released. And the report for that program is public. You can still access it and read it through and see what's in there. One of the most notable things that's not in there, if you do a quick search through it, is any mention of an API. The tools that were used in it are included in the appendix. So you can use those same tools on a CTF environment or deliberately vulnerable API-driven apps, and they come up with little to no results. Meanwhile, a month after it got this clean bill of health and it was released, they ended up on Krebs. And so that's where the news was released that, 60 million instances of PII were leaked over this API. And I think it actually took like another year for them to close the gap on that vulnerability. If a tester had used the API as it was designed, not even, putting on the black hat or anything, right, just really using it, and you had done a search with the API for an address that was an apartment complex, you'd see excessive data exposure. So you would see the data of everyone else that lived in that apartment complex. Their information would also be leaked. There were also authorization vulnerabilities in there too.
Man, I see a whole lot of like even different perspectives, because absolutely 1,000% from the testers and validators and assessing side, start with that API, because man, that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. And there's just so much that can come from it. A lot of stuff might fall out. But I also am thinking about like the developer side. When you're writing applications, when you're building software and code, I always feel like they should start with the API and bake in and build in some of that security first, so that those things don't happen. I might go out on a limb here, maybe touch a hot stove and I'll get flamed for it. But I think if software is written without a central API, tends to be crap software. when it's tacked on sort of halfway along, or maybe at the end of the development cycle, then that's when even immediately opens up all those bugs and leaks and vulnerabilities and flaws. So man, getting this thing in the forefront of everyone's mind is I think a super important thing. And I'm going to be right there beside you, also touting like, hey, bring the API first, make that the first priority.
And then John, I mean, I might say like APIs have sort of been this elephant in the room of API security, right? And I'll give you an example. You might have heard of FedRAMP. It's the regulation for anyone that does cloud services to the government. You have to certify for FedRAMP, and in there, under RA5, is a monthly vulnerability scan requirement, right? And it says all web interfaces. This is the exact word. Web interfaces must be scanned monthly, and you deliver your reports back to your government agency, right? So I asked the PMO, the program management offices, does that concept, web interface, does that include APIs? And unequivocally, the answer was yes, it does. Okay. And then I talked to dozens of FedRAMP certified organizations, and every last one was like, that's not a requirement. right? It just like flat, like every last one, right?
Oh, it sucks to laugh at that.
So I think there's a new version of FedRAMP coming out, and I think it will, in fact, say, including APIs, just to make it, very, very clear.
For sure.
But like probably for various reasons, and one of them, lack of talent, lack of tools. How would you go about, sort of scalably, continuously, effectively testing your APIs, right? And frankly, it's why, Corey didn't find a book, and there wasn't a course, and why we have 30,000 folks signed up into APISEC U, right? This is this, elephant in the room. And when you read about breaches, it's rarely a SQL injection attack that's succeeding, right? It's some sort of BOLA, logic flaw example that, leveraged a gap in the API. That's where the breaches are happening.
Well, thank you for really leading the charge here. I think it is a real necessity, and I don't know. I'm glad we lit the match, and hey, that's all from you. So hey, as we're winding down in the last couple of moments here, how can folks get started? How can folks jump in? How can they get a hold of you if that's appropriate? How could they stay with this thing?
Sure, yeah, definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. Follow me on Twitter. I'm putting out, any API security related information that's out there. I'm pushing that out and having great conversations with people. That's way number one. Number two, definitely join the course. We have a Discord community of people there that great to chat with and help you through any questions about the course or additional study material.
Yeah, definitely. And Corey is at happy_hacker, HAPI, on Twitter. Great guy to follow on LinkedIn. Highly recommend folks sign up for APISEC University, just at apisecu.com. Free to sign up. We have monthly newsletter. We like to feature great people to follow on LinkedIn and other great resources. And yeah, that Discord community is phenomenal. I think we're north of 3,000 folks in there. Some really smart folks, really vibrant. A lot of good conversation going on there. So lots of good ways to get involved.
Fantastic. I'm super happy to hear it. And hey, for folks that don't know, maybe just a little fun Easter egg. I got to meet Corey just some time ago for the SANS Difference Maker Award ceremony, cheesy thing. And poor Corey was the victim that had to sit in our required designated seating with me for dinner the entire evening. So hey, we got to have a whole lot of fun bantering and chatting. And I gotta say, truth be told, just loving all the sweet stuff that you all are up to. Great to meet you both in person when we had. And I think it's really often that we say in our industry and in our whole community that, like, look, all the folks bringing out free education and free knowledge, that's what's carrying this forward. And that is how we stand on the shoulders of giants. Not to be cliche, not to be trite and any of that, but it's one thing to say that, and then it's another thing to be the giants. So hey, kudos and credit to, again, you all. And I hope folks will dive in. I hope we can get some folks interested in all of this APISEC University, the book, and API security testing. But thank you both. And this has been a great chat.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks a lot for having us on.
Cool. Thanks all.